Pranam Swamiji, if we have your
Namaskar.
permission.
I'm here. Yes, please start. Yes, please start.
Yeah. We will start with a prayer by the classical singer and music teacher from Detroit, Srimati Bini Pankar. Bini, please.
Namaskaram to Pujya Swamiji Sri Sarvapriyananda. Yo anta pravishya mama vachamimam prashuptam sanjeevayatyakhila shaktidharaswatham अन्यांश्च हस्त चरणश्रवणत्वगाधिं प्राणां नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यं प्राणां नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यम् सान्द्रानन्दावबोधात्मकम् अनुपमितम् कालदेशावधिभ्याम् निर्मुक्तम् नित्यमुक्तं निगमशतसहस्रेण निर्भास्यमानम् अस्पष्टं दृष्टमात्रे अस्पष्टं दृष्टमात्रे अस्पष्टं दृष्टमात्रे गुरुपवनपुराधीशम् हन्तभाग्यं जनानां हन्तभाग्यं जनानां हन्तभाग्यं जनानां कृष्ण
Thank you, Bini, for that beautiful sloka and prayer. Now, I would like to invite KHNA Michigan Chapter's President, Sri Surendra Nair, for the welcome speech.
Namaste to all those who are present to attend the blissful discourse of Sampujya Swamiji. As most of you may know, KHNA Michigan is a registered non-profit organization working tirelessly since 2012 to promote, strengthen, and uphold the core values and principles of Sanatana Dharma within the state of Michigan. Since its inception, we have planned and conducted countless discussions, events, and satsangs aimed towards preserving and promoting the religious, socio-cultural, and artistic aspects of our Dharma. Today's spiritual discourse by Pujya Swamiji Sarvapriyananda, the minister and spiritual leader of New York Vedanta Society, has been made possible thanks to the hard work and efforts of Sri Raghu Ravindran, Ramesh Ikandath, and Srimati Shobha Jayakumar, the leaders of KHNA Michigan Spiritual Committee. The theme behind the discourse is delivering today will be Vedantic principles in daily life. One of the unfortunately common misconceptions that may of us have that matter pertaining to spirituality such as Vedanta and essence of Vedic living are matters that one should only think towards the end of their life and not as a part of their daily active life. These misconceptions born from this mindset are what we hope to change through this session. The study, discussion, and dissemination of Vedanta should be incorporated into early life and adulthood of all adults and children in our community in order to ensure what we are able to actualize these principles through daily living. And thankfully, we have most qualified and authoritative expert leading this discussion and imparting to us with wisdom none other than Pujya Swami Sarva Priyanandaji. On behalf of our KHNA Michigan family, we would like to wholeheartedly welcome Swamiji for this time, grace, and willingness to enlighten us through his discourse this beautiful evening. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Sri Pradeep Bose, the Honorable Secretary of Vedanta Society, KHNA President Sri Satish Ambadi, our Trustee Board Chairman Sri Rajesh Kuti, Michigan Chapter Secretary Jai Murali Nair, Vice President Sunil Paingol, Treasurer Dinesh Lakshman, Joint Secretary Gautam Tyagarajan, and all other Hindu organizational leaders present here. And last but not least, I would like to welcome and acknowledge everyone in our Sanatana Dharma family who has joined us from across North America to take part and learn from this discourse and discussion. Thank you all again. Namaste.
Now, next, we all know that Swamiji doesn't need any introduction among us, but for a formal introduction, I invite Ramesh Ikandata. Ramesh, please go ahead.
Namaste. It's a privilege and honor for me to introduce a master on Advaita Vedanta, Pujya Swamiji Sarva Priyananda. Not that Swamiji needs an introduction, being the torchbearer of spreading the light of ancient Indian philosophy in this country and continuing the rich tradition set by the great Swami Vivekananda. Swamiji joined Ramakrishna Mission in 1994 and received sannyas in 2004. Swamiji has served the mission in various capacities, excelling the role as Acharya or teacher in several mission institutions all over India. Swamiji was the first registrar at the Vivekananda University at Belur Math. 2015 December, Swamiji moved to US, initially to Southern California, and then to Vedanta Society, New York, where Pujya Swamiji is the spiritual head for the past 4 years. Swamiji is a voracious reader and scholar in topics such as philosophy and psychology. Swamiji is constantly expanding the boundaries of his vast knowledge. In 2019-2020, Swamiji went back to academics, was a fellow at Harvard's Divinity School. From the YouTube videos that I saw, it's clear that Pujya Swamiji had a refreshing and distinctive presence in the Harvard campus, wearing monastic robes, enjoying both teaching and learning. The stage is all set for us to hear from the most respected Swamiji on a topic that's of utmost importance to us, Vedantic principles in daily life. An announcement before the session: we welcome questions from the audience, which can be posted in the Zoom chat. However, considering the time constraint, we will select the questions based on the relevance to the topic, and we will ask the questions to Swamiji as it is typed in the chat. Pranam Swamiji, please accept our humble obeisance. We kindly request you to enlighten us with your discourse.
Namaste, and thank you for having me. Thank you to the organizations at KHNA for organizing this event. Thank you also for to Ms. Panikar for that beautiful rendition at the beginning of the prayer. Let me also start with a prayer, and then I'll talk briefly for maybe 45 minutes, and then we will go into the Q&A. Om Sarve Yatra Sukhinas Santu Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Let all beings be happy. Let all beings be cured of illness. Let all see auspiciousness. Let unhappiness come to none. Let sorrow come to none. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness unto light, from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. I would like to begin by acknowledging and remembering that the suffering that is going on throughout the world, especially in India at this time due to the COVID pandemic. Only last week, we lost a number of Swamijis also. Two of them actually were from Kerala. They were Swami Sampurnanandaji and Shantimanandaji in Kochi. At this time, this discussion about Vedanta takes on added significance. That when we are faced with the inevitability of the end of human life, that death comes to all of us. So suffering and death are there always in human life. It's only when it comes in a widespread global manner in like this once in a while, thankfully not all the time, but once in a while, that this we are faced, everybody is faced with this question. Suffering is always there at all times. Individually, some family somewhere, some individual somewhere is always facing illness, death of either their own or near and dear ones. But here, because it's on a global level, national level and international level, we are all forced to confront it. And this is the subject of Vedanta, not just Vedanta, all of Indian philosophy. The subject is this. Is there a deep, lasting, profound solution to the problem of suffering? Dukkha nivritti, is it possible? That is what Kapila starts his Sankhya philosophy with, a question into human suffering and how to overcome suffering. That is what Buddha starts Buddhism with, the dukkha, that is the first noble truth, the Arya Satya. And is there a solution to suffering? And what is the method for that solution? And Vedanta also has the same objective. The objective of Vedanta is Atyantika Dukkha Nivritti Paramananda Praptischa. Complete transcendence, negation, cessation of sorrow, and attainment of lasting bliss and happiness. Is it possible? That itself is a major claim of Indian philosophy, not only Vedanta, every school of Indian philosophy, both Hindu and Buddhist and also Jain, all of these schools, they all have this common claim that yes, it is possible. There is actually a solution. And this needs to be stressed in our age. Our age is marked by widespread, I would not say atheism, but I would certainly say agnosticism, that there is lack of interest or skepticism about the very possibility of any spiritual solution. So this spiritual solution to life's problems, this is what Vedanta offers. Now today's subject is Vedantic principles in daily life. So I have to make it as universal as possible. The core idea of Vedanta, the purpose for which Vedanta is there, let there be no mistake. It is moksha. It is the ultimate goal of human life. As it was said in the introduction, for everybody. It's not that it's only for old people or sannyasis. I remember when I was a kid, I was very interested as to study Vivekananda's books and go to the ashram. So once my aunt and other relatives, they scolded me that you are a little boy. These are all for old people. For when you become old, you will be interested in this. Why are you going to the ashram or reading Vivekananda now? No, it is for everybody. Whether you are young or old, whether man or woman, whatever caste, whatever race, whatever nationality. It is the fundamental human question. So yes, that is the purpose of human life, ultimate purpose of human life, to transcend suffering and attain peace and happiness. But also, suppose somebody says that, Swamiji, the topic today is Vedantic principles in daily life. Suppose I am not interested in your moksha, enlightenment, God realization. Suppose I'm not interested in spirituality at all. Even then, can Vedanta help me? Yes, Vedantic principles contain enough wisdom which will make our life, even if you are not explicitly interested in spirituality, if your person is just interested in maybe learning or earning money or just living the life and being as happy as possible in this particular life itself without looking to any kind of spirituality, even then it is possible. Vedanta will help you. So today when I speak about Vedanta, the Vedantic principles, it will be primarily as a spiritual path, but also secondarily, suppose somebody is not interested in religion and spirituality, even then how it can help, that I will mention. So I'll speak about 4 major principles. The first principle is unselfishness, not selfishness. What does that mean? All our life, our activities, whatever we do, whatever I do, it is all directed to making this particular person, this individual happy. This one, Sarva Priyananda, this individual. All my eating and drinking and exercise and reading and entertainment and whatever work that we do, whatever activities we do in the family, relationships, husband, wife, children, father, mother, professionally, your learning, your work, earning money, status in the world, achievements in the world, all of it is generally, you will see, ultimately directed to I, me, myself. It is ultimately for myself. So this idea, it seems we don't question it. I want to be happy, so I should work for my own happiness. And those who are related to me, I will work for their happiness. Now, Vedanta is counterintuitive. Vedanta says you will not be happy that way. It won't work. Till now, it has not worked. By fulfilling the desires to try to satisfy this one individual being, have you become happy? In 20 years of your life, in 40 years, 60 years, 70 years of your life, after so much effort, how much lasting satisfaction have you gained? We will all, to be honest, we have to admit, not much. And Vedanta says, here is the principle. Very interesting, counterintuitive. The principle is not for oneself, but for others. If I want to be happy, it is better to be unselfish, to be altruistic, to be selfless, to work for the benefit of others, to do something for the larger good. That makes me happy. It's counterintuitive, you see. Normally, the instinctive way is that if I work for myself, I'll be happy. But now Vedanta is telling us, the more we work for others, the more we expand to take into concern others' needs, the more happier we will be. Swami Vivekananda says, unselfishness is more paying, but it takes maturity to understand this. Ultimately, unselfishness is better for you. Even selfishly, it is better for you as an individual, but it takes maturity to understand this. I like this example given by an American psychologist in a class. I mentioned it a number of times, is that once a psychologist in a class here in some university in the United States, this experiment he did in the class, that today instead of the class, we will go out and watch a movie. And he took all the students out and they watched a movie, and he came back. Because it's a psychology class, he gave them a questionnaire immediately afterwards. How much happiness did you get from this movie? Scale of 1 to 5. How much satisfaction? No satisfaction at all, 1. A lot of satisfaction, 5. So the students rated it 3, 4, 5, something. Then the next week he said, today, again there is no class, but today we will go out to this poorer section of the town, this side of the city, and there we have gathered kids from the less privileged families. So we'll make friends with those children, and we have gathered a lot of gifts for them, toys and clothes and so on, and we will give those gifts and we'll spend the afternoon with them. And so the college students did that. The moment they came back, they were given another questionnaire. How much happiness did you get from this activity? 1 to 5. And so they rated it, something. Now, the interesting thing came 6 months later. Suddenly in the class, the professor said, here is a questionnaire. Remember, 6 months ago, we went to a movie. How much happiness, think about it. How much happiness does that movie give you now? Many people said, we remember we went to movie. Some had forgotten the name of the movie. Some said, happiness now from that movie. Not much, 1 or 2. Right now, how much happiness remains from seeing that movie? How do you feel that you went to see that movie 6 months ago? Nothing much, nothing at all. Mostly gave 1 or 2. Then they asked a question. The question was, remember that activity we did? We went out and we met those children and you gave gifts to them, made friends with them, spent time one afternoon with them. Think about it. How much, by thinking about it, how much happiness do you feel now? And they all gave high ratings. Even now we feel sense of satisfaction and fulfillment that we did it. See, one thing we never regret is doing things for others. Even if others are not grateful, throughout our life, especially as years go by, when you look back upon our activities in our life, the things which we cherish most are our altruistic, selfless actions. So this idea, it comes from the teaching of Karma Yoga, that instead of trying to fulfill the needs of one individual, the more I direct it out, expand, the more happy I will be. I know I have met people of my age who are in their 40s now, who say that, look, we've got a job, we got married, we have children. Now I know how my life will go now. More or less it is set. I understand that I have to do this job, I have to raise these children, and this is how my life will go. But I feel, is that all? Can I not get more satisfaction in this life? And what does our society tell us? If you want more happiness, they will tell you that here is a new iPhone, here is a new brand of Starbucks coffee, here is a new vacation, new gadget. That's the only thing that our society can recommend. That in order to be more happy, do this. That will not be fulfilling. What I tell them is, right, now you have done enough for yourself and your family. I don't tell them that you have to meditate or do Vedanta Vichara. You just expand yourself a little bit. Include others who might not be able to do anything for you in return. But if you do something for them, either you contribute monetarily or you give your time, especially in this country, in the United States, people are very generous in their social action, the volunteering, taking part in various activities for the welfare of the community. So many opportunities are there. So if you do that, so like, for example, the people who are engaged in the KHNA here and doing this, I know for certain, those who are volunteers and organizers here, you get a certain sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in organizing this and having a series of events. It's because you are doing it for a larger community. You see, more than, like, I'm sure more than 100 already people are here. So just because of your efforts, so many people are benefiting. So this feeling, this is a much deeper, lasting happiness compared to just doing something for myself. Just enjoying a movie, that gives a little bit of happiness. But when those college students went out and helped other kids, that gave much more lasting peace, much more lasting fulfillment. I can guarantee those college kids will remember it for the rest of their lives also, that we were able to do something for those kids of poor families. So this is one point. Unselfish, selfless, altruistic action is much more satisfying. It's a great principle. It's worth learning. It is just the opposite of what we instinctively feel. I will do it for me, myself, and I'll be happy. No, big mistake. The more you do for yourself, it may be, why should I spend my time, my money, my energy? I could be earning money or something, or enjoying myself, watching a movie or going on a vacation. No, if you do this, you will yourself gain. You gain more than others. Swami Vivekananda said, let the giver kneel down and offer. Let the receiver stand up and receive. That you are blessed that you have the opportunity to do something for others, that we are, our skills, our time, our energy, our money is needed, and it can be effect, and it can actually help others. Another side of this, one thing worth learning from the principles of karma yoga is this: it is the one spiritual practice which everybody can do. I noticed how Swami Vivekananda emphasized karma yoga. And in the Bhagavad Gita, you see one thing Sri Krishna emphasizes throughout the Bhagavad Gita is karma yoga, what he tells Arjuna. Now, I notice, I'm a monk, but when I come into contact with people, most of whom are not monks, they are householders, a common question is, Swamiji, your whole life is dedicated to spiritual practice. So it is easy for you, and easier at least within quotes, but at least you are all about, you can study Vedanta, you can meditate, you can do bhajans, you can teach Vedanta, and that's your job. So everybody is happy with it. But we have so many other things to do. So little time and energy is left over for Vedanta, bhakti, meditation, all of these things. So what about us? Then I realized the wisdom of Sri Krishna or even Swami Vivekananda in emphasizing the importance of karma yoga. This is another thing to understand, that converting our daily activities into spiritual practice. There is no other way for most people. Your job, your family, your personal well-being, they take up so much of your time, so much of your energy, that if you divide your life into secular and spiritual, here is my secular life, my own life, my parents, my wife, husband, children, my job, my community, and there is my spiritual life. Then spiritual life will always lose. It will always be lose. It will get the lesser share of time and energy, and so that's why, as in the beginning is saying, that people have the feeling in India also, the feeling that all this is for old age, when you have got time, you're retired and all of that. A lot of my own spiritual inspiration came from my grandfather. And I remember my father used to say, oh, don't think your grandfather was so spiritual all the time. We know he became spiritual only after retirement. We are seeing, you are seeing like this now, that your grandfather is so spiritual, interested in Vedanta, giving you books and all. But only after retirement, I have noticed he became interested in spirituality. This is the problem. If you want to be spiritual, we have to convert our daily activities into spirituality, and no other way it is possible. One Swamiji, Anubhavanandaji, is very funny, humorous. So he said, in a recent talk I heard in India, he was speaking in Hindi, and he said that Sri Krishna taught so many things to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. How to sit, how to breathe, and how to keep your eyes closed, where to meditate, how to have bhakti to Krishna, the devotion, the practice of devotion, the sattvic mindset, so many things, Vedanta Vichara, that you are the Atman, not the body, not the mind, you're Atman. So that Swamiji said, not one thing Arjuna practiced. Nothing. Arjuna did not do any of it, because it is impossible. He is in the battlefield. How can he sit straight and close his eyes and Duryodhana will fire an arrow at him? So it is impossible for him to do that. Only one thing was practical for him, which is karma yoga, which Krishna stressed throughout the Bhagavad Gita. That work which you are doing, you convert it into spiritual practice. How? How will we convert our work into spiritual practice? Just about almost all the activities you do at home, in your personal life, and in your family life, and in your job, they can become spiritual practices. You say, this is my worship, just as I do ritualistic worship of Krishna or Rama or Devi in my shrine. In the same way, this is my worship of God, in whichever form you like. So whether I'm working in the office, whether I'm cooking food, whether I'm cleaning my apartment, all of this, my Lord, I offer to you as my worship. Like when you puja, you finish your puja, Sri Krishna Arpanamastu or Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu, you do in mentally also. So in our ashram, whenever we do any work, it could be cleaning my room, it could be distributing food, serving food to the old Swamijis. But mentally, what am I doing? I am worshipping God. The whole attitude is Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. that my Lord is present in all of these beings, and in this way my service is going on. Arjuna had a horrible task of fighting a war. Our task is much easier than that. So whether in the office, let me give you a practical example. Again, I've shared this story a number of times. Somebody asked me, what are the strangest places you have given? Top 5 peculiar places, strangest places you have given talks, Vedanta talks. So in the top 5, there are interesting places. Once it was in an aeroplane. Once it was in a jail, prison. Once it was to immigration authorities here in the United States. While entering United States, they asked me to give a talk. Then once it was in Lucknow airport. So interesting. So one example I'll give you. I was passing through Lucknow airport late in the night once, many years ago. And I was the only passenger, transit from one place to another. So, in just like in the United States, you have the TSA people who check. Similarly, in India, you have the CISF people who check. So they'll make you stand on top of a box and pat you down. Now, the sergeant was there in that Lucknow airport. He said to me, Swamiji, kuch bataiye. Swamiji, please tell us something. I said, what? Here? Now? Late in the night in the airport, nobody else is around. He said, yes, nobody's here. You tell us something about spiritual life. And he gathered the other policemen and women. I was thinking what to say to him at this time late in the night. So finally I said, आप जब घर से निकलते हैं, पूजा करके निकलते हैं, when you leave your house for your job, do you do some worship ritual? He said, yes. Hanuman ji को फूल चढ़ाते हैं. I worship Hanuman ji. I put flowers at the feet of Hanuman ji. I said, very good. Then what you do is, all these people throughout the day, they are passing in front of you. You check them. You do your duty politely, firmly, attentively. And after you pass each person, mentally offer one more flower at the feet of Hanumanji. Like this you do. He was so happy, very simple and nice gentleman. He was so happy. He a big smile, I still remember. He said, Arey wah, din bhar Hanumanji ka puja. Whole day I'll be doing puja of Hanumanji. Yes. One can actually and should actually convert one's daily activities into worship. So I am worshipping, just as I worship God in the shrine and in the temple, I am worshipping God in the office, in the family. You need not tell anybody. Don't tell husband, wife, or children that I'm worshipping God in you. They'll take advantage of you then. And then they say, Mummy cannot punish, but Mummy can punish. That is also worship of God. So one can convert all of one's activities into the worship of God. Of course, this is only possible if you have faith in God. Many people here, they don't talk about God. Only Vedanta Vichara, directly talk about Atma. But if we have faith in God and we worship God in these ways, not just in temple. The greatest temple is the human body. The greatest image or the greatest deity is the soul, the Atma in the human body. Why not worship that? Worship it at least with a few sweet words, encouraging words, with a smile, with polite behavior, even when you don't want to, even when you want to lash out. But then if we consciously feel divinity is present in this form, let me react to people in the way as if divinity is present. I remember many years ago, I was in our main monastery in Belur Mutt, and young brahmacharis who have come to be monks. So they come every year for training. So some senior monk comes and gives an introductory talk before the training starts. That year, one senior monk, he was asked a question by the young brahmacharis. How should we relate to each other, the other monks? What is our relationship to other monks, my batchmates, other monks? And the Swami gave us such a beautiful reply. He said, what your relationship is to your guru, one who has given you mantra diksha, who is your guru, that relationship you have to everybody else, at least internally. Imagine the kind of reverence, the kind of seriousness you have in the presence of your guru. Now imagine if you could have that internally, not externally, but internally, if you could have that feeling for everybody in the world. In one sense, they are our gurus, because if God is present in all beings, at all times, they are helping us in our spiritual progress. So this is one point. The point is selflessness, unselfishness rather than selfishness. And if you can connect it to God, make it a worship of God, that is the most powerful spiritual practice. All the other points I will mention, they may be a little difficult, but this is something everyone can do. It spiritualizes our whole life. If you say one point, Vedantic principles in daily life, this is what spiritualizes our daily life. Sister Nivedita, she said in the introduction to complete works of Swami Vivekananda, henceforth, no division between the sacred and the secular. Make everything sacred. Our world is such that we try to make everything secular. Even the sacred we are trying to make secular. It's just the opposite. Spiritualize all of life. Second principle I want to talk about is focus. Focus, not distraction. If I want to put it in a non-theological, non-religious language, focus, not distraction. This comes from Dhyana Yoga or Raja Yoga. This world today is a world of distraction. I think it's a great teaching from Vedanta which we can share with everybody, especially younger generation. You know, the psychologist and writer, journalist Daniel Goleman, writer and psychologist, Daniel Goleman, who popularized the term EQ, emotional intelligence. He has written a book a few years ago called Focus. He said, I was approached by so many people, teachers, parents, and young people from the younger generation. Their common problem is they're very distracted. The teachers are saying that this generation, in the last 10 years or so, are far more distracted, far more likely to lose focus than earlier generation. Difficult to teach a text, difficult to teach for 30 or 40 minutes. It's continuously flickering. Attention is continuously flickering. You mentioned I was at Harvard last year. I was watching. I never expected to go back to college after so many years. So I was watching what is the difference. Last time I was in a university or college was in 1990, 93, 94, and 1993. So now, after so many years, what is the difference? And that too in such an elite institution. So I was watching how students study, very good students, very intelligent students. But in the classroom, I would say the professor is teaching something, and all the kids, nowadays they all have computers. So it's not that they are not paying attention. They are paying attention. But what Goleman calls intermittent attention. So that's what we do. Because of the presence of all this, especially in the pandemic time, continuously we're connected. Good that we are connected, but it also makes our attention intermittent. What is intermittent attention? Just imagine most of the meetings that you have in your companies and all. Your CEO is giving a presentation or the department head. You listen to it sometime, you check your mail, your social media. Now multiply that 5-10 times. The kids are like that. The kids are like that. I noticed. So they're listening to the teacher, they're Googling something, they're sending some messages, they're all sitting near me, so that you can easily see what is going on the screens. They're sending some messages to the friends. They're also concentrating on the subject matter, what the teacher is saying, they're checking it up, looking it up on Google and searching for that. But this is intermittent attention. Recent studies, I'll recommend a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, I think. Deep Work. There he says, any excellence, any serious work, not just matter of creativity or science or religion or whatever, simply making a report for your company, some hard work you have to put in, you have to cut out distractions. And he says, the moment you're distracted, you're working on a project, suppose something serious you're writing, and your phone rings or some message comes. The phones are very devilish that way. Ting sound will come. Immediately your attention is diverted for 3 seconds. You look there and then you come back. He says to get back your attention to that full concentration, it takes some 18 minutes or something, he was saying. Imagine the loss that every time we get distracted, we are losing so much of attention. So attention, the training of attention, that is common to all meditative techniques. Last year, we had a meditation retreat in the Garrison Institute, upstate New York. So we looked at meditation in Buddhism, we looked at meditation in Kashmiri Shaivism, in Bhakti traditions, in Advaita Vedanta. One professor told me, professor of philosophy, he said, after you look at all of that, after you study all of that and you give talks on that, why don't you and all the participants in the retreat sit together and find out what is common to all of it? What is common to Buddhist meditation, yogic meditation, Kashmiri Shaiva meditation, Bhakti meditation, and Advaita Vedanta meditation? What is common? We found, we thought about it. We found one thing. What is common is training of attention. What is common to all meditative techniques? Training of attention. Swami Vivekananda says the difference between an ordinary person and a great person lies in the degree of concentration. Difference between ordinary person and a great person lies in the degree of concentration. One person's work I would like to share. I would really recommend you look it up if you are interested in this matter of concentration and attention. Flow, Flow, Flow. The name of the author is very cumbersome, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, a very long name, but it's a very well-known book. This gentleman, he is from Eastern Europe, I think maybe Czechoslovakia, Romania, maybe Austria. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he works in the United States now, and for the whole of his life, his whole work, he's a psychologist, his area of interest is concentration, focus. And he says, what increases the quality of our life? And here is the conclusion. The quality of our life depends on what you pay attention to and how much attention you pay to it. I will repeat that, worth remembering. Quality of your life depends on what you pay attention to and how much attention you pay to it. Let me give an example. One person who has written a book on concentration, Rapt, Winifred Gallagher, she says that I had to, she gives the example of a person who had cancer. So this lady, she suffered so much from cancer, and so much so that finally she decided that I cannot do this. Constant anxiety, chemotherapy, physical illness, sickness, financial distress, loss of job, I'm just going mad. Instead of doing this, let me pay attention to my work. She was a creative writer. Let me attend to that. And minimum attention to these physical, it will go on, these problems will go on, but minimum attention, maximum attention to what is positive and nice in my life. You see, what you pay attention to and how much attention you pay to it. So she said, after a few months of this, I found my life after cancer was better than my life before cancer, because I was deliberately paying attention to what was good and nice in my life and ignoring the nasty part of it. Minimum attention to that, maximum attention to the positive part of my life. How much attention you pay. I like this Milton, where he says, the mind in its own place can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. The mind by itself can transform hell into heaven, and it can transform heaven into hell. I've seen so many young people, rich, privileged family, all advantages in life given by their parents, destroys his own life, maybe drugs or something. Mind can make heaven into hell. And the opposite, in the most desperate circumstances also. So such inspiring stories of people who have struggled against poverty or disease or childhood abuse or whatever it is, and come up and done wonderful in life and become a blessing to others, can transform hell into heaven. What is the difference? Mind. In what mind? Here Mihai Csikszentmihalyi says, what you pay attention to and how much attention you pay to it. We have a limited attention span. How much of it we can pour into one thing? All great people, whether it is Mahatma Gandhi, Albert Einstein, or whoever, Vivekananda, Shankaracharya, and I. What is the difference between us and them? The difference between us and them, they all had 24 hours. We also have 24 hours in our life. In every minute also, we have the same attention span as they had. But the difference was in the degree of focus. They concentrated their attention, energy, time to a high purpose in life, and one purpose in life, one high purpose in life that dominated their life. We get scattered. So anyway, this is the principle, Vedantic principle we take away from the Dhyana Yoga, that focus, not distraction. Concentration, not distraction. The third principle I want to talk about is love, not desire. What has happened to us is, the unhappiness we have is because our desire, the power of desire, has gone into the world, 100 different things we want. And we have thrown our desire into that, in the hope that by wanting these things and getting some of them, satisfying our desires, we will be happy. What Vedanta tells us, this is from Bhakti Yoga. The principle from Bhakti Yoga is you are looking for happiness in the wrong place. Collect that desire, concentrate it, focus it, and channelize it towards God. Naradiya Bhakti says, Sarvada Sarva Bhavena Nischintitei Bhagavan eva bhajaniya. At all times, in all ways, completely free of tension and anxiety, worship God alone. Only God alone is worth being worshipped, worth being loved, worth being served. Focus your love on God, and through that you love all human beings, because the Lord is present in all human beings. You will be happy. Focus your love on individual human beings, on objects, on possessions, unhappiness, guaranteed unhappiness. So this idea from Bhakti, that love, don't scatter your desire in the world, but channelize your love to God. Now suppose somebody asks, what about the principle for somebody who's not interested in God realization right now? So in that case, love, not desire. You give love to others, and instead of this wanting from others. One little school girl I remember in Calcutta many years ago, 20 years ago, in a talk with school students, she asked, I don't have any friends. How will I get friends? So I thought, what should I say to her? I said, be a good friend to others. Don't worry about not having friends. Be nice to others, be good to others, be a good friend to others. You will find you will get friends. Similarly, you give love to others, you will find you will be loved. You will get 10 times more back. Swami Vivekananda talks about a triangle of love. It's very interesting. Triangle has 3 vertices. He says, what kind of love we are talking about in Vedanta is, first of all, no shopkeeping in love. If there is bartering or shopkeeping, then it is not love. Even in human life also, if you really love somebody, there is no question of give and take. It is only give. You are happy to give. So when your own child, for example, best example is parent and child. So from I'm talking from your perspective, not from child's perspective. Child is very selfish, but parents, they love to give. That attitude, if we can have for everybody in the world, I give. Swami Vivekananda in his poem says, give, give, never look back. He who looks back, his ocean dwindles into a drop. So, love, not desiring from others. So one vertex of the triangle of love, as Swami Vivekananda says, no shopkeeping in love. I love God, so that's it. Not even for moksha, not even for God realization, enlightenment. I just love God. My happiness is in loving God. Loving God is the method, loving God is the end. So that's the beauty of Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti is the method, and Bhakti is the goal also. I am happy just to love God. One sadhu in Uttarakhand said, do you want to be happy just now? Very happy and inexhaustible source of happiness? Yes, yes. Who does not want it? Then fall in love with God. This is fall in love with God. Bhakti. The second vertex, Swami Vivekananda says, love knows no fear. So, in religion, the beginning may be with awe and fear of God. Especially we see, in Christianity, it is stressed very much the fear of God, on Islam also. So that may be beginning. At the beginning of bhakti, you can start with awe and fear and reverence of God. But very soon one must progress. Love is possible, there is no fear. In Vedanta, what we do is we humanize our divine relationship and divinize our human relationship. Humanize our divine relationship means, how do we look upon God? God is mother or father. God is the child. Vatsalya bhava. God is the master, I am the servant. God is the friend. I am the friend. God is my friend. God is my child. Vatsalya bhava. Or even as the God is the beloved. Madhurya bhava. So all of these are human relationships. And yet we are establishing with God. And we are divinizing our human relation. Husband, wife, children, father, mother. What are we saying? God is present in everyone. You are divinizing human relationship, humanizing your divine relationship. So there is no fear. Where there is fear, there is no love. So higher bhakti always demands no fear. Third angle, the triangle I'm talking about. The third vertex is love knows no rival. Love knows no rival. So that there the Old Testament has got it right. I am a jealous God. I mean, in the Old Testament it is said. Yes, what does it mean? What does it mean I'm a jealous God? It means our love must be for God and God only. In our language, Saguna Brahman Ishvara, in whatever form. If you are a Vaishnava, it could be Narayana, Vishnu, or even the avatar like Krishna or Rama. If you are a Shaiva, it could be in the form of Shiva, or if you are Shakta, in the form of Devi. God or the avatars of God, one-pointed love. And all my love for others is through that love. Because my Lord is present in others, I love others also. But my love is one and one-pointed only, no rival. So these three things Swami Vivekananda said. Anyway, these are some principles. Final point, I'll dwell on it a little bit. Self-knowledge, not knowledge of the world. This is the principle. Self-knowledge, not knowledge of the world. Self-knowledge, Vedanta says, ultimately, what we must know is who or what we are. Isha Upanishad says, Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. See God in everything. And Shankaracharya comments there. Isha means by the Lord, and the Lord means Paramatma. Paramatma means your own Atma. So by your own self. So starting from Isha, Shankaracharya in his commentary has taken it to your own self, Atmana. See everything pervaded by yourself. That means you realize the universal nature of yourself. I'm not this little body and mind only. There is this great depth to our human reality, that we are not physical beings. Who amongst us, all the 100 people present here, who amongst us thinks that I am just flesh and blood? And yes, we may think that we are bodies, but is that all we think we are? Not at all. Every one of us thinks that we are a person. At least this much we think, that I am a mind, a personality, embodied. I am in a body, but I am not a body. Vedanta goes further. You are not even a mind, not even that personality. There is something deeper than that personality, that background consciousness. Pancha kosha vilakshana atma, avasthatraya sakshi atma. That consciousness, which is the witness, the illuminer of the 5 sheets of the human personality. Physical sheet, Annamaya kosha. The pranic sheet, Pranamaya kosha. The mental sheet, Manomaya kosha. The intellect sheet, the Vijnanamaya kosha. And the causal sheet, the Anandamaya kosha. All of them, which I consider myself to be, I am not. I am the consciousness which illumines all of that. My waking, this, what I consider to me is, I am this person, here is this world. I am the waker and this is my waking world. This is who I am. No, this is my jiva aspect. My real aspect is, I am the conscious witness, the fourth, which experiences waker and waker's world, dreamer and dream world, deep sleeper and deep sleep world. That one consciousness, avasthatraya sakshi, the witness of the 3 states. Pancha kosha vilakshana Sharira traya vilakshana the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body. Sthula, sukshma, karana, sharira. Apart from that, the consciousness illumining it, that is my real nature. Today itself in the morning I was giving a talk on the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad mantra. Atmanam ched vijaniyat ayam asmiti purushaha kimichan kasya kamaya shariram anusangjaret. If I realize, if I, the individual being, I realize my nature is such, Satchidananda, infinite existence, no death for me, no birth, no death. Chit, infinite, unlimited consciousness. And Ananda, fulfillment, unperturbed ocean of bliss. This is my nature. If I realize this, Atmanam ched vijaniyat, you realize this, then what will happen? Kimichan kasya kamaya. Desiring what? What more desire will be there? For what? And for whom? That individual being for whom I was desiring everything I'm going to do for this person, Sarvapriyananda, I realize it's a mask. It's not the reality. The reality is this infinite existence behind the mask of Sarvapriyananda. Then I have no more person who is anxious to fulfill desires and so on. Shariram anusangjaret. Will a person continue to suffer along with the body? Body will suffer. Body, everybody, even Avatara, and like Jivan Mukta, whoever it is, physical body will grow old, diseased and die. Nobody can prevent that. Medical science can only hold it back little while. But you are not it, you are not limited by it. So the suffering of the body is not your suffering. This realization, the Mandukya Upanishad says, Sa Atma Savijñeyaha, That is the self, Turiya, the fourth, and that has to be realized. So this is the principle from the Jnana Yoga of the core of Vedanta is this self-knowledge. You realize your infinite nature. This will free you of all suffering. But suppose somebody says, all right, but remember, the topic was Vedantic principles in daily life. Can you tell me how I'll apply it if I don't believe in your Atma, Brahman? Then the simple answer will be self-knowledge, not just knowledge of the world. Knowledge of the world is good, but one must know oneself. Everywhere in life, I see one serious problem, quite apart from spiritual problems, problem of adjustment. Unable to get along with others. Why? Because there's no awareness of one's own nature. Quite apart from Satchidananda Brahman, just the nature of my mental makeup, my own character. One monk, he told me many years ago, when he became a monk, he was a young novice, so he used to write to a very senior monk for advice. In those days, postcard letters. So one day he wrote to that senior monk, I don't like this ashram, people are mean to me, I can't live here, I'm feeling unhappy, I cannot bear it anymore. And he was expecting some sympathy. So the reply came, I think those days were better, where you had to wait a few weeks for reply, not instant. Nowadays everybody wants instant reply to email. So reply came after a few weeks. He was expecting sympathy. I cannot bear it anymore, maybe he will be sympathetic. The old Swami had written to him, remember, others are also bearing you. We are not aware of our own self, how we are behaving, how is it affecting others. So this consideration, this self-knowledge, rather than just knowledge of the world is always there. I saw this, you mentioned Harvard. There, it is all about knowledge. The whole place celebrates knowledge. Only except one thing, self-knowledge. That is not there. So self-knowledge, not just knowledge of the world, principle number one. Principle number two, love, not just desire 100 different things. Principle number three, focus, not distraction. Principle number four, unselfishness, not selfishness. Each of them is worth learning because they are really a big change from the way we are living our lives. So thank you very much. If there are questions, we can take up the questions.
Yes, Swamiji, there are a few questions in the chat, so I will just read out. The first one is from Vijay Raghavendra. How can we practice pillars of Vedanta in daily life that you talk about in your Gita discourses? That is Shravana, Manana, and Nidhyasana.
Yes, so that is the practice, what is called Antaranga Sadhana, the inner practice of Advaita Vedanta, where you systematically study Vedantic texts. Shravana literally means hearing, but you systematically study it. It means you need a teacher, you need books, and you study it and you think about it. And once you get clarity, you meditate upon what you've got clarity about. But that is the inner practice of Vedanta. What one thing one can do, that funny Swami said that Arjuna did not practice anything, whatever Krishna taught him, but one thing he could practice, and he did practice, and Krishna taught him that again and again throughout Gita. That is Karma Yoga, transforming our daily activities into spiritual practice. That everyone, no one can say that I can't do that, I don't have time. What are you doing? What are you filling up your time? Job, family, good. That job and family, you transform that into spiritual. It's just a change in your internal attitude. Like that Hanumanji ko phool charate hain. I put flowers at the feet of Hanumanji. Who cannot do that? If I say I cannot do that, I'm not being sincere. I certainly can do that. Everybody can do that. So that's a very powerful teaching. So how do you transform this? How do you practice these pillars in daily life? One is Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana takes time. You must set aside some time. If we are spiritual seekers, we must make this effort to set aside some time, especially good time, early morning or in the evening. One Swami Madhavanandaji, was president of our order, was very practical. He said, work is worship, that's great. It's as a slogan. But first, practically, you must start with work and worship. Then, second level is work as worship. And finally, you will attain to work is worship. Right away, if I say, no, I'm not doing in spiritual practice, my daily life, my earning money itself is spiritual practice. That is not honest. So first of all, we must set aside some time for spiritual practice. It could be meditation, it could be a little study of Gita, Upanishads. So that is one thing. The second practice we can do, all of us we can do, is to convert our spiritual life, our daily life, into spiritual practice. So these are the two things I will say.
Okay, the next one is from Srini. If someone performs selfless action but cannot connect to the concept of God, would this principle be effective in one's spiritual journey?
Certainly. I would say that connected to concept of God is easier, but suppose someone cannot, it depends upon your mental makeup. So in Hinduism is such a wide range of options are available. I always say Hinduism is a full spectrum religion. So with God you want to do karma yoga, good. Without God you want to do selfless action, good. That will also help you not only, but it will help you spiritually. So Swami Vivekananda said that in Karma Yoga. You may do Karma Yoga as a worship of God, but suppose you leave God out of the equation. Can I do Karma Yoga as Karma Yoga? My duty as duty for duty's sake. Duty itself is a spiritual practice, and I don't want anything from it. That is very powerful. If you can do that, so usually it is a little more difficult. If God is involved, if I have love for God in some form, and if I involve it in my Karma Yoga becomes a little sweeter. When does our work become sweeter? When you do it for somebody you love, then it does not seem to be such a burden.
There is a question from Sudhir Prayaga. Isn't giving donation or doing service to get moksha has some inherent selfishness in it?
No, it does not. Whether we give money or time, if you have no time and energy to give, you may give. That is also, your money is basically your time and energy. You have earned money by putting your time and energy into it. So whether it is monetary help or you're giving time in service, your energy in service, is it selfish that by this I will get moksha? Vedanta will say by this you get purification of mind, and that prepares you for the higher practice of Vedanta, Shravana, Manana, and Nidhyasana, and then that leads to Jnana, and that leads to moksha. But anyway, the point is taken. The question is, spiritual practices, if we do it for spiritual realization, moksha or mukti, is it being selfish? No. Sri Ramakrishna put it very nicely. Desire for God cannot be counted among desires. Why not? Because it destroys all other desires. It helps us to come out of all other desires. He gave the example, Bengalis are very fond of sweets. So he said that the sweets cause acidity. In America, you call it acid reflux. So sweets cause acidity. But one is there, this michri, candy, what do you call it? Rock candy. Is michri. So that one, it fights acidity. If somebody has got acidity, you put it in water and you drink that syrup, it fights acidity. So he says, sweets cause acidity, but michri, the rock candy, it fights acidity. Similarly, desires for the world cause suffering, but desire for God negates that suffering. It helps you to overcome that suffering. So desire for God realization, moksha, nirvana, mukti, whatever you call it, it is not a selfish desire. It helps you to overcome all other selfish desires.
Okay, next one, Savita Chandrasekharan is asking, regarding love, can a lamb love a lion or can a frog love? That's all she has written. I guess the question is,
so the question is, so two things, 2 points here. I understand the question. Your love, so whom you are loving, somebody said nicely that the shepherd protects the sheep against the wolf. Always cares, be careful of the wolf, be careful of the wolf. It's protecting, telling the lambs, be careful of the wolf. I am protecting you against the wolves. And the whole time the lamb spends in being afraid of the wolf, but ultimately it is eaten by the shepherd only. So, whom will you love? Suppose that person you love exploits you, hurts you, is a danger to you. How will you love that person? 2 points here. One is that you are not a lamb and that person is not a tiger also. From a Vedantic perspective, you are that one consciousness. So what appears to you as a tiger and a lamb is you yourself, your own self appearing in those ways. So that's a very philosophical way of looking at it. Fine. Practical answer. So Sri Ramakrishna gave the answer of the tiger Narayana. The tiger Narayana, Sri Ramakrishna said, Narayana is in tiger also, but that does not mean you'll go and embrace the tiger, because then the tiger will embrace you and you will be in trouble. So practically, the story he told was, one student in the ashram of his guru, Brahmachari, in the ashram of the guru, learned that Narayana is everything. He liked the teaching very much. The next day he went to the village for begging. It must have been in Kerala because an elephant was coming. So, so people were saying, we are unable to control the elephant, run away, run away. And that Brahmachari thought, what is the problem? The elephant is Narayana. I worship Narayana, so the elephant is Narayana. No problem, nothing will happen to me. The Mahout was on top of the elephant, unable to control. He says, I am unable to control, run away, don't stand in front. Not listening. The elephant picked up that Brahmachari and threw him aside and charged on. And the Brahmachari lost consciousness and the people in the ashram were worried. Finally, they went out to find him, brought him back to the ashram. And when he revived, came back to consciousness, he told, this is what happened. Then he says, Gurudev, you told me that Narayana is everywhere, but elephant threw me aside. If Narayana is an elephant, but why did Narayana hurt me? The Guru said, it is true that Narayana is in the elephant also, but Narayana is in the Mahout. That Mahout Narayana told you to move out of the way. Why did you not listen to the Mahout Narayana? Now, this is not being clever. This is being practical. Ultimately, you have a goal. There are stories of great saints who are so established in Brahman consciousness that I am the one reality. They will not even try to protect their own body. That may be possible. But until we come to that stage, one sadhu, I'll tell you, one simple formula for you. I was just reading recently, one senior Swami, Saradeshanji, he said to another monk who wrote this down, he said, not selfishness, but self-protection. So don't be selfish, but self-protection is important until you have achieved your goal. Your goal is God realization. Your goal is enlightenment. Have you become enlightened? Are you at that level where everything is Narayana to you? Really you feel it? Even if somebody gives you a blow, it is nothing to you. If you are not at that level, then you must protect yourself. Self-protection. The Swami who was here many years ago in the Vedanta Society of New York, Swami Pavitranandaji, he used to have this saying, do not abuse a horse which you cannot dismount from. Don't abuse a horse anyway, but do not abuse the horse you cannot dismount from. Your own body, for example. Do not mistreat the body. Because as long as you are embodied in this body, if it is ill, if it is in pain, no spirituality is possible. Spirituality is possible only when the body is healthy and strong. So one has to be careful about worldly life. You're a householder, your finances, the peace of your family, the stability in your job. All of these are necessary not only for your worldly life, they're necessary for spiritual life also. If the worldly life is too much disturbed, spiritual life not possible. So yes, you're right.
Next is from Sushmita. Doesn't Vedanta practice happen anyways by being a good human being?
Yes and no. By being a good human being, there is a question. Is good possible without God? So somebody wrote, I think in front of a church here I saw, good minus God. If you mentally write it, think G-O-O-D minus G-O-D. What will be left? One O will be left only. So good minus God is zero. Somebody wrote in front of a church. Now there's a debate on this. Can you be good? Can you be a good person without being spiritual or religious? Some will say no, some will say yes. Just by being good, are you being Vedantic? Only in the long run, in a general sense. Yes, it will help you. But at one point, that question must arise. What am I? I'm trying to be good. But who am I who I'm trying to be good? What is this world? What is the purpose of life? Why am I here? Is it at all true that I am not this person, that I existed before the birth of this body, I will exist after the death of this body? Are these questions important to you? At one point, these questions must become important. I'm just trying to do my duty. That's good. that's a decent human being. Is it enough to be, or there's something more in spirituality? There is something more in spirituality.
Aditya is asking how to practice and increase concentration.
I recommend that you read that book. 2 books I will recommend. Flow, I can write it in the chat, I think. Flow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. This book, if you look in Amazon, you'll find it. Another one is Deep Work. Flow is old, it's an old book. Deep Work is a new book. Deep Work, Cal Newport. These are very secular ways. They're not talking about spirituality. Though in Flow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi mentions it is the best way of attaining concentration that I have studied in all my survey of ancient and modern literature. He says the best way I have found, most powerful way, is Patanjali Yoga Sutras. He says, I think 2 pages he gives to it. He says it ultimately, he says it may be too difficult for many people, but that is the best manual for concentration I found. Anyhow, and this work, Deep Work, by this book, Deep Work by Cal Newport. He says in this age, quality is most important, and quality requires concentration. He gives the example of like music video or something like that. He says that on YouTube, somebody's music video gets 1 million views. Another person's music video gets 1,000 views. So is that first person's music 1,000 times better than the other person's music? Nothing is 1,000 times better. He says, no, in this modern age, all you need to do is to be a little better than the other person. Then everything will come to you. See, in earlier times, 40, 50 years ago, when the world was not connected, what did we do? We purchased things which were the best things available at our local market. We go to the shop, whatever is available there, you purchase the book, I remember cassette tapes, music tapes, and we purchased that. But now the whole world is your market. Amazon brings to you, everything is available to you. What will you purchase? The best one only. And what is the best one? Which is little better than everything else. And therefore, everybody will make the same decision. Everybody will go to that same author. Everybody will go to the same musician. Everybody will go to the same professor. I will not listen to the professor in my college. I will listen to only the top psychologist, Steven Pinker, Harvard University. I noticed that myself. At Harvard, I found a typical classroom at graduate level. Maybe 20 people sit. It's a typical graduate classroom. And then I went to attend Steven Pinker's classes. He's like a rock star psychologist professor. If you see, he's one of the top psychologists in the world today. Steven Pinker. 400 persons sitting in the class. Full auditorium. People sitting on the carpet, on the staircase. I took pictures of that. It's just a class, an ordinary class. Why this difference? Is he 100 times better than the other professor? That cannot be. Nobody is 100 times better than anybody else. But you just have to be little better than others. Then everybody will flock to you. That little better depends on concentration. Very, very important. You may not be interested in God, spirituality, anything. One takeaway for if you want success in life, you want quality of life, you want to feel better in life. One answer, focus. And that's just the opposite of what most of us are doing these days. You focus, do something with focus. I was watching YouTube videos, then I was reading a book. I found reading the book gave me much more peace and concentration and happiness than watching YouTube video. A very interesting thing. So focus improves the quality of your life, and focus makes it more certain that you will succeed in life, in whatever you're doing. I noticed one thing throughout my experience, last 25, 30 years, I saw some of the best students in some good institutes, some average institutes, whether it is the IITs in India, gave talks there. I would always love to go and sit in the library and listen and watch people. I'd read and I watched the students studying. Whether it is IIT there or Harvard in Boston, wherever. I went just to see. I visited Oxford. Whenever I go anywhere, I always want to see the university there. One thing I noticed, the best scholars, students, professors have this unique quality of concentration, focus, one-pointedness. They can focus for hours and hours on one thing. They can focus their weeks and days and years on one object. I attended a talk at Harvard by Paul Steinhardt. He's a physicist who has written a book called The Second Kind of Impossible. So he's launching that book. So at Harvard, you get this continuous stream of intellectual superstars, Nobel Prize winners, and so on and so forth. So many events. So I made it, 1 year I crammed in as much events as possible. I went to, and I would attend talks day and I think I attended more talks than did studying. Some days there were 4 or 5 events I was attending. They're all talks and lectures. So this Paul Steinhardt, he is an expert on crystals. He's found a new kind of crystal. Anyway, so at the end of the Q&A, you can see it's probably there on YouTube. After his talk, you can see me standing up and asking a question. I asked him, what would you say is the secret? What dominates your studies, your academics, and your colleagues? You work with an exceptional group. He said, did you not see what I said just now? 30 years of my life I've dedicated to one problem. And he says, if I can get an answer to my research quest, I'm ready to, he pointed to the wall of the auditorium. I'm ready to go through that wall to get an answer to that. So that is focus. That is concentration. And this I saw again and again. Steven Pinker, I asked him, do you know that you're where you have got your office? William James Hall, Swami Vivekananda came to Harvard and he gave a talk at Harvard University. That room is still there where Swami Vivekananda gave a talk. William James invited him, and William James had a good friendship with Swami Vivekananda. And William James has mentioned Swami Vivekananda, especially Swami Vivekananda's teachings on focus and concentration. Raja Yoga is mentioned in his book, Varieties of Religious Experience. And William James said that it was an honor to meet a person like a human being like Vivekananda. So Steven Pinker did not know. He said, I did not know this this background. Anyway, yes, focus. One takeaway is this focus. Yes.
Okay. Next question is from Shobha Nair. If we apply Narada Bhakti worship, seeing God everywhere, and Ishavasya Upanishad, how do we incorporate that in a corporate world or disciplinary actions when needed?
You can do it. Why not? Our monastery is also like an organization. Don't the senior swamis have to take disciplinary action when we make mistakes? They do it. And they say that who can discipline? It's only a person who loves who can discipline. If you scold me or punish me and I don't know that you don't like me, it hurts much more. And I feel the rebelliousness. But I know you are concerned for my welfare. And then you scold me, I will accept that scolding. I will accept that reprimand. I will accept that disciplinary action. You may even have to dismiss people. Unfortunately, that's how companies work these days. Large numbers of people you may have to lay off. So very difficult. I know it's not easy. It's easy to say these things, but it's difficult to actually do it in practice. But to some extent, at least, it will help. Remember, this is not what you asked, but one point I forgot to mention. Naradiya Bhakti, the Bhakti we talk about in Vedanta is a little different. Why? We might say we all have Bhakti. We go to temples, we worship God, we do rituals, we do puja, offer puja. So that is Bhakti. That Bhakti is a worldly Bhakti. I do it, so let things be all right in my family, let my job be fine, health be fine, things be good. Nothing wrong in that. That is conventional religion. God for my life. But my life for God. I love God because I want to realize God. I love God for the sake of loving God, not for what I will get from it. That is Naradiya Bhakti. That is the higher Bhakti. So that is the kind of Bhakti which is taught in Vedanta. So you can in fact have disciplinary action. One thing you can look up in corporate life, it was popular a few years back. Nowadays people are not talking so much about it. Servant leadership. Robert Greenfield popularized it, I think. Robert Greenfield? Greenleaf, not Greenfield, Greenleaf. So that name is associated with Greenleaf, servant leadership concept he gave. But where did he get it from? He wrote a book called Journey to the East, where he talked about this concept of servant leadership. That the basic concept is this: in corporate life, you can apply it in corporate life, that my basic identity is a servant. We in India, we are very hierarchical, so we don't like the idea of being a servant. But he said, let my basic idea is that I want to serve. My identity, beginning and end, is that of a servant. I want to serve everybody. Now, at one time, I will be raised to the position of responsibility in the corporate circles. Maybe I'm the head of the department or the head of the branch or something like that, or CEO. So as long as I've got those powers and responsibilities, I'm still serving. And afterwards, when that position goes away, I'm still serving. What many people make a mistake is that when I will get a senior position, when I will get the power, when I will get elected, then I will start serving. No, that never happens. Service is an attitude. From the very beginning, you must have the attitude of being a servant leader. So everybody can be a servant leader. And you can see how that is connected with the concept of bhakti.
If it is okay, Swamiji, we have a couple of more questions.
Yes, we'll finish it.
Yeah. So the next question, the person has only put initials PH. So the question is it okay for temples to accept donations from people who have earned money through unacceptable practices? Is that justified?
Temples in general, religious institutions can accept donations from anybody. You never know where it is coming from. But if you are a spiritual practitioner, Sri Ramakrishna, for example, it's worth learning from his life. He was very careful about company. You have to be very careful about your company. Satsanga, the company of good and holy people, is very important for spiritual life. So we are careful. If the source from which the money has been earned, if that is illegal, that will be damaging for my own spiritual life. I would rather eat plain rice and dal more than, but not delicacies, if that delicacy is bought by money earned, through illegal means. So Sri Ramakrishna was very careful about it, and if we are a spiritual practitioner, one should be careful about the company one keeps and where one's. As a monk, for example, we have to depend on others for donations and everything the food that I eat and the clothes that I wear. These are all gifts from householders. But then one has to be careful. If I accept things given, say, suppose by somebody who's by criminal means or illegal means has earned money, that effect will come on me also, and that will damage my spiritual practices. So one has to be careful. But public institution like temple, people can give, and they do give. They do give.
Thank you, Swamiji. Next one is from Sarbani. When one tries to meditate, then all thoughts come at that time. How to control your mind? You
and me, sister, all of us. So that is a common problem. Arjuna asks this question to Krishna. 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. When Krishna teaches him meditation, Arjuna says, all these meditation techniques you are teaching me, they are of no use, useless. He's telling Krishna, actually it's there. He says it will not work. Why will it not work? Because the mind is difficult to control. You're telling me to focus in this way. When I try to focus, all sorts of thoughts come. Exactly Sarbani's question. Then what can we do? And Krishna gives an answer there. Please look up 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita towards the end. He says, Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate. Two things he says. One is regular practice and one is vairagya, dispassion. What is this regular practice and dispassion? See, the mind is a machine. You are not the mind. Just like the body is an organic machine, the mind is a subtle machine. So a machine has its inertia, certain patterns of behavior, like an animal, for example. This idea recently was investigated by Jonathan Haidt. This is his book, Happiness Hypothesis. Happiness Hypothesis. There he says, there is so much literature on self-improvement. If you go to Barnes and Noble, you will find whole shelves, so many things. how to get friends, how to lose weight, how to be a better speaker, how to do this, how to do that. If only a few books you take from there, your life should be transformed. You should be the most fantastic person on earth. So many skills you will get. But after all that advice, all those books, why our lives are not changing? Why aren't we improving to anywhere near the expected level? All these books promise so much. Are the books wrong? The books are not wrong. So Jonathan Haidt mentions, what is the problem in change? Why are we unable to improve? And he says, see, the books are talking, this Vedanta, whatever we are teaching, we are all talking to the intellect. It's the intellect who goes to a Vedanta talk or online seminar. It's the intellect who buys books. Intellect who understands all these things. But the actual practice is not done by the intellect. The actual practice is done at the level of the body and the emotions. And so you read, and that early morning, getting up early in the morning and sitting and doing yoga is very good. And you decide, good, I will do. It's a wonderful thing. Next morning, what happens? The intellect does not do yoga. The mind is not doing yoga. Who has to get out of the bed in the cold morning? It is the body, and the body will say, "Did you involve me in your decision? You never asked me to get up early in the morning and do yoga. I will not get up." Now, what will you do? So the example he gives is elephant and the mahout. So the mahout who sits on top of the elephant, the mahout knows where he wants to go, and he can guide the elephant there only if the elephant cooperates. Only if the elephant listens. The elephant is much stronger than the mahout. If the elephant does not want to go that way, elephant wants to go that way, nothing that the mouth can do will stop it. Because the elephant, he cannot control the elephant. The elephant is so strong. Then how will you control the elephant? That is the question. The mind and body are like that elephant. Intellect is like the mahout. You have read all the books in Barnes and Noble, and then thinking, why I'm not able to change my life? Change my life is to change the elephant. How will you change the elephant? The only way of changing the elephant is training. How do you train how do you change the elephant? How do you control the elephant? Only by training, not by giving lecture to the elephant. Will you take the elephant to come to the seminar? No. Elephant listens to training only. Similarly, our mind and body listens to training only. So Krishna gives that answer to Arjuna. You want the mind to meditate? Yes, training. Daily morning and evening, if you sit, abhyasena, regular repetition, systematically, sincerely, if you repeat it, within a short time, within a few months or years, you will find some improvement at least. I will not say you will meditate like Vivekananda, but some improvement will definitely, you will notice yourself. So not over ambitious. Second point is vairagya. Vairagya means our minds are distracted because our minds are hooked to things in the world, either through fear or temptation, either through interest or anxiety. So many things and people goings on in the world, our mind is naturally inclined to that. That's why when you sit in meditation, the mind does not want to. If you force it, it will fall asleep. Otherwise, it will be restless. Either you feel sleepy or you feel restless in meditation. And we all go through this. That is because of lack of vairagya. So Krishna says, vairagya, a dispassion for the world. My goal is God realization, which is what I am doing by meditating on God. My goal is not this 1,000 different things in the world. I have tried that. That does not give fulfillment. I have now decided my goal is enlightenment. Yes, in the middle of the world itself, like Arjuna. Arjuna was a warrior. He has been advised to continue his activities. Not that you have to give up your job and run away to the Himalayas. You will be here in the midst of family, in the midst of job, in the midst of responsibilities. And yet you must learn the art of cutting away and meditating inside. So Ramakrishna gave the example of the three friends who are drunkards. So three drunkards, late in the night, they decided to cross the river. In Bengal, big rivers are there. So they got in the boat and they were rowing. Early in the morning, they found they were in the same place itself. They had not gone 1 inch. Why? They had forgotten to take off the anchor, untie the rope. Similarly, we are without untying the rope, we meditating, repeating Krishna, 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 meditating will not work. It's the same place because we are tied to this world outside. That vairagya is untying the rope. So two things are necessary: regular practice and a dispassion for too much involvement in the world. Then the mind will be able to, you can concentrate the mind in meditation.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you so much.
I think we have covered pretty much all questions, and it's already 9 o'clock. It's past 9 o'clock. We didn't realize how 1.5 hours have passed listening to Swamiji. So with Swamiji's permission, I would like to invite Jayamurli Nair for vote of thanks.
Namaste Puja Swami Sarvaprayanandaji. Words cannot express our gratitude enough to you for finding some time to share with us and bless us from your busy schedule this evening. We are so blessed to hear from you the words of such wisdom and advice about Advaita philosophy and how it is so relevant and how everyone can apply it in today's daily life. Swamiji, on behalf of Kerala Hindus of North America, Michigan, I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much.
Also,
Yes.
thank you. Also, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Sri Pradeep Ji, the Secretary of Vedanta Society, for arranging this satsang with Swamiji. I would like to thank KHNA Michigan President, our own Sri Surendra Nair, for welcome speech and all the guidance in conducting this event. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Sadish Ambadi, KHNA President, for joining us in this satsang today. Next, I would like to thank Srimati Bini Panikar for that beautiful prayer to set the mood for our satsang today. As always, Bini, you are amazing. Thank you. Now I want to thank Sri Raghu Ravindranath for conducting this event and handling the Q&A session very, very well. Now this wonderful satsang was made possible by the hard work and passion of our spiritual committee headed by Sri Raghu Ravindranath, Sri Ramesh Kandat, Srimati Shobha Nair, and Sri Gautam Tyagarajan. Our sincere thanks to the team on behalf of KHNA Michigan. I would also like to express my thanks to Sri Dinesh Lakshman for the technical and communication help. Last but not the least, this satsang would not have been such a success without the support of each one of your esteemed presence and active participation. KHNA Michigan sincerely thank you, especially the youth audience tonight. We look forward to more such satsangs, and all of your continued support and blessings are requested. Let's keep the people who are suffering from India in our prayers tonight. Once again, thank you all. Good night. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Swamiji.
Take care and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you very much, Swamiji.
Stay safe.
Thank you.